Let's go.
Fucking
They
hell,
were just
dude.
going at it.
They were going at it. Oh my God. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Little Dicey podcast. I am your host, Salvatore. This is your host, Matt. And we're talking D&D 5e classes like we always have been for the past 12 episodes. This is episode 13. No, wait.
No, I gotta be right.
This is episode 12.
12.
Yeah.
12.
For the past 11 episodes, this is episode 12. We are continuing our series.
Is this 12?
This is 12.
Okay.
Double check to see if our microphone audio, by the way, is going. Scroll down on that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Scroll. Yeah. Okay, we're good. We're all the way good.
Yeah.
We can pull the desktop audio down though. That little module right there. Yeah, pull that down. Good stuff. Perfect.
Okay.
Alrighty, so if you guys aren't familiar, maybe you're catching this for the first time on YouTube. If so, welcome. It's good to have you. We are currently live in studio on twitch.tv/AlittleDiceyDND. We go live with this podcast every Saturday at 12 Eastern Standard Time, noon Eastern Standard Time. And if you're not familiar with Matt and I, we play Dungeons & Dragons live on Twitch. Same URL as I mentioned earlier, twitch.tv/AlittleDiceyDND. Every Wednesday evening at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We have a campaign called the Great Nelidian Crown. We're going to be on episode 33 this upcoming Wednesday. We'd love it if you join us. We just sort of kicked off a new arc, sort of our third in our little installment here. And things are getting very, very interesting. So I highly recommend checking us out. So yeah, with all that out of the way, Matt, why don't you tell us sort of how we go about doing our ranking system that we have been with the past most of all classes. I think we only have 3 left, right?
Yeah, this will be our third to the end. So yeah, so we're talking about we're doing kind of a classic class ranking for D&D 5e. In this case, though, usually it's kind of strictly a power ranking.
Yeah.
And in this case, what we're really talking about is what I've sort of been calling like your satisfaction ranking overall. So we know that like some people are, they just want to like kick ass at the table.
Fuck yeah.
Some people, maybe they don't care as much about being effective, but they just want to like play a character or whatever. And what we're really talking about here is that when you pick a class, whether you're a first time player or a long time player, and you pick a class, you probably have a certain fantasy that you expect to be able to fulfill playing that class. And then you sit down at the table, you start scrolling through your abilities and you're like, oh wait, this doesn't really do anything that I thought it would do. Or, I had this specific thing that I was really hoping to fulfill, and the class mechanics don't really allow for that. So that's really what we're talking about here, is how well the mechanics, as designed by Wizards of the Coast, support what we would expect from a given class.
Hell yeah. And I do want to point out, I'm going to correct myself earlier, one of our lovely members of our community, Extra, who's in chat right now, has reminded me that we're actually on episode 34 of the Great Nelidian Crown. Man,
you fool!
I'm an idiot. Sometimes I don't remember my own lore. Also, I never specified I'm the dungeon master here at A Little Dicey. Matt is one of our amazing players, and we have for this particular part of our platform, our podcast, we like to give both behind the screen and in front of the screen, point of views about the classes, and we give our ranking at the end collectively, and we give a single ranking to it, but we like to try our best to give our perspectives from either side to give you as well-rounded of an idea of what this class is as possible. Yeah. So hopefully that works out well. But today, as voted on by members of our community in our Discord, if you are not familiar with the Discord, you can see it in the description below, or if you're live in chat right now, actually everybody in chat right now is a part of our Discord, so that's awesome. You can check that out there. Thank you, Extra. I don't know if you have clear. You know what, Extra? Remind me on Wednesday. By the time Wednesday comes around, actually no, you can remind me on Tuesday, because I will be live playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel on Tuesday. And I know you're going to be there. I'm going to give you clearance. Cleric. I'm going to fucking blow my brains out today. I'm gonna bump you up in the chat, I think, so that we can give you some. Congratulations, Extra! I gotta do that.
You did it.
You did it, Extra. You've been here so long.
You earned it.
But today, as I said, as voted on by our members of our community in our Discord, we're gonna be talking about the Cleric. I'm gonna say Cleric. You're gonna probably say something of a in between.
I'm gonna say Cleric.
Yeah, beautiful. Tomato. Who gives a shit?
Who gives a shit?
Divine powers. God damn it. We already talked about the Paladin.
Yes.
The Cleric, if you are not familiar, is sort of the de facto priestess sort of divine caster of Dungeons and Dragons. It essentially, when we're going to sort of go through the player's handbook of the 5th edition sort of base write-up that Wizards of the Coast has provided for us. A lot of people, I feel like, don't really read these a lot when they create their characters. They usually just sit down with the dungeon master or with a more experienced player with the character sheet, or they go through dndbeyond.com and then go through their character creation process. And you know, I really feel like there isn't a big emphasis on like really learning what your class is before you make it, because a lot of times, like when I'm actually introducing my my partner right now and a lot of our friends, I run 2 games for them, and they like it. Like they understand what it is that, you know, we play and everything now. They want to play more, which is great. I think anybody who, I've yet to meet someone who's played the game who doesn't want to play it again after. So I think that that's really great, and that's wonderful. But I definitely know that I just sort of like I had to make their characters relatively quickly, and when I was telling them about what they could do, it was really just a matter of like, I was like, a wizard, you learn spells and you read books. It's like Harry Potter. And they're like, oh, cool. And I'm like, a sorcerer is like that, but you don't read anything. You just know how to do it, and it's like crazy. And they're like, oh, I like that. And so I never really sat down and like described what a cleric is. And I feel like a lot of people generally don't do that. Like, I could be wrong, but it seems as though when you're making your first character, people never read these things. So we like to break it down and get a really good understanding of what these classes are, at least as, you know, rules is written as Wizards of the Coast describe them.
Right. Well, that's the big thing, right? Is if this is Wizards telling us what they think the class should be. I might have an idea, and I might just not really be, not wrong, but just misaligned with what Wizards, you know, thinks it should be. I should say Wizards of the Coast to not be confusing. But this is where the designers of the game tell us what they think the classes should do, and if the mechanics then don't do that, then that's a problem. Like last week, we talked about the monk, and right in the description of the monk, it talked about the monk, you know, in a hailstorm of arrows deflecting, you know, and it's like the monk cannot do that. So don't describe it.
So that's a problem. Way, you know? And in addition to that, a lot of times these descriptions will allude to a lot of the different subclasses. And I think that that's a little bit detrimental, because it's kind of like, I understand that you want to allude to them to give a player an idea of what they could eventually do. But I find that the cleric might suffer the most from this, because they don't really, besides a wizard that prays, like they don't have a real base identity, I don't think. I feel like your identity as a cleric comes from your, it's not a, I don't remember what it's called. It's not a circle. It's a, your fucking
is it an order?
Domain? Your domain.
Yeah.
Granted, though, you do choose the domain at level 1.
Yeah.
But that's the thing, is that, like, I mean, that does remedy that. But while we go through these things, it kind of it'll be a little bit difficult to rank the cleric, because their identity specifically comes from their subclass. So I think that this will be a slightly unique episode, and it might be relatively quick, because I want to save subclass stuff for when we move on to the subclass stuff. But you know, like, you'll get your main features and we'll get to them. But
well, I think you're probably right in that the kind of the core expectation of playing a cleric is that I'm a priest.
Yes.
Which usually most people think I'm healing. Yeah. You know, religion is going to be a major part of my sort of background. And I think that's cool. You know, it's sort of like in a way, wizard is kind of generic. I think in a way, cleric is kind of generic. And I don't necessarily mind that. I also think that sometimes that generality leads to sort of reduced expectations when you start to play a thing, right? Yeah. Like a monk is a very specific idea, I think, right? And if I'm going to play a monk, like, I want to be able to do all this incredible, like, kung fu shit, right? Yes. And maybe also some of the Goku nonsense with energy blasts, and maybe some of the astral projection and all these things, right? But at its core, I want to be flurrying of blowsing. Yes. Right. But like cleric and wizard, they're both like, okay, I'm like probably a nerd who casts like arcane spells, or I'm sort of a priest who casts healing spells, and that is. I think probably what cleric basically does do. I do think it makes people feel like they have to focus on healing, which I don't think is generally necessarily the most effective thing you can do as a cleric. But
I mean, campaign 2, they had 2 clerics. One of them never healed ever.
Right.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, I think if a player selects Cleric, if I were to give like a pre-ranking on Cleric, I would probably say like at least an A, because
my pre-ranking is A for
because
sure.
I think that if I'm a new player and I'm like, I want to play Cleric, I think that you're gonna feel like you're.
Oh, you're definitely gonna feel like you're definitely gonna feel like one. I mean, immediately off the rip, jumping into the sort of descriptions at the top of these the sourcebook class pages for Cleric specifically. There's like a nice little sort of role play right up in the beginning, but then getting into the description of the class, the first excerpt is titled "Healers and Warriors."
Yeah.
So there's your idea right off the rip. It goes on to say, divine magic, as the name suggests, is the power of the gods, flowing from them into the world. Clerics are conduits for that power, manifesting it as miraculous effects. The gods don't grant this power to everyone who seeks it, but only to those chosen to fulfill a high calling. So immediately, you already add where another character in their backstory might not have this yet, and this might serve them through the story, which I usually prefer as a dungeon master. Like when I tell my players to create characters, I usually, depending on the level, I usually tell them, hey, your backstory can be interesting and like whatever, save your big moments for the campaign. Like I'm always, it sucks when I have to tell a player to tone down their backstory because they come to me and they're like, I've done this, this, and this. Like I blah blah blah.
It's like I'm a level 2 fighter and I felled the great dragon.
And I'm like, well, why are you playing the game then?
Yeah.
Like, shouldn't you be retired already?
Right.
Like, you know what I mean?
Right.
Like, we're playing the game to make those stories.
Yeah.
But Cleric sort of has this built-in thing to it where you already are a chosen one by essence of your ability to do these things via the blessing of a deity that gives you these powers,
and
right?
you do get to pick sort of maybe why you're chosen, or maybe you have no idea, right?
Yeah, and that's great.
Right. Hey, like suddenly I'm a chosen one of this god, and I don't, you could play it like, wow, like maybe you feel undeserving.
Yeah.
And like, I don't really understand why I would be picked.
Right.
That could be interesting. You could play it like you're like, yeah, fucking, of course I'd be picked. I'm amazing.
Yeah.
There's a number of ways you could play it.
Yes.
But yeah.
This excerpt is interesting. It's not interesting, but this is a very good place to start understanding like how your character works. Then the next paragraph goes on to say, harnessing divine magic doesn't rely on study or training, specifically or training.
Yep.
A cleric might learn formulaic prayers and ancient rites, but the ability to cast cleric spells relies on devotion and an intuitive sense of a deity's wishes.
Yes.
So here's the thing. Based on that alone, I like the ideas where a lot of people will like to play this sort of like, I hate using the word edgy or whatever, because I feel like that diminishes the story that they're trying to tell. And I like that story where you're raging against the idea that you have to serve this deity or something, but still you're a cleric. I like that. That's fine. The problem though is mechanically, you should not be able to do these things unless your cleric's, ideals are such that they want you to rage against them. You know what I mean? Maybe they're the god of like freedom or something, and they're like, oh yeah, that this rebellion
So
against
proud
me.
of my boy.
Yeah, but like it's this weird thing where it's like, well, should that, is that idea moot? Because you're built into the class. In order for you to level up, and leveling up is how you learn new spells, and in order to cast these spells, you have to continue to get more. You have to upgrade your intuition about what your god wants. So it's like if you're not following the ideals of your god, with Warlock it's very easy because it's like, are you going against the pact that your patron gave you? Then you don't get these powers.
That's the point. Can I say something controversial in that it's not everybody's special and perfect opinion. Yeah. Don't play a cleric that is misaligned with your god.
Yeah, like it's just not.
Just don't.
You can do that.
Doesn't make any goddamn sense. Here's what you can do.
Yeah.
Here's what you can do. You can play a cleric who is aligned with their god.
Yeah.
And then has a crisis of faith during the campaign.
That's awesome. That's great.
And then you can work with your DM to decide what that means mechanically.
Yeah.
I know that for example, the character of Ford in Critical Role lost their powers. They're a warlock, but lost their powers because of a conflict like this. When I played a warlock in our first campaign prior to the stream, I was at conflict with my patron. At times, and we did not do a lose your powers aspect of it. No. And I think the rules as written don't support you lose your powers if you whatever. But
generally
anyway,
they don't.
But you can work with your DM. You could play that any number of ways. You could start multi-classing into a different class. You could just play it purely through role play. There's lots of ways to do that. But if you're like, I'm making a level 1 or level 2 cleric who's a life cleric, but they actually want everybody to fucking die. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it makes zero sense.
It's like playing a fighter who doesn't know how to use weapons.
Yeah, it's like, what are you talking about? Yeah, it doesn't make any sense.
So, yeah, I think like you alluded to, Warlock, even Paladin, there are other classes that rely on
an Oathbreaker.
Yeah, there are other classes that rely on a relationship with a very powerful being that make more sense to do that with. So just don't do that.
Yeah, there are better ways to tell that story for sure.
Yes,
I completely agree, and I think pigeonholing yourself, it's dumb, and like it's like, dude, just like I don't know, it puts your dungeon master in a weird position, because then like now I have to be like, all right, well, what the fuck do I do?
Yeah. And
then like you talk about it and they're like, well, I don't want to not be able to play, and it's like, okay, well then we can't do this then, you know what I mean? And so it puts everybody in a weird position.
Yeah.
Anyways, further along, clerics combine, this is the last paragraph of this section, clerics combine the helpful magic of healing and inspiring their allies with spells that harm and hinder foes. They can provoke awe and dread, lay curses of plague or poison, and even call down flames from heaven to consume their enemies. That's all, by the way, that is all traditional like Judeo-Christian stuff that you might see in like any of the Abrahamic religions, that's cool inspiration.
Yeah.
So all of those things, maybe if you're not too familiar with that lens, that I know we're familiar with it because of our upbringing.
Sure.
That to me, I'm like, it sounds eclectic when you first read it, but if you put it through that lens, it's actually kind of dope.
Yeah.
For those evildoers who benefit most from a mace to the head, clerics depend on their combat training to let them wade into melee with the power of the gods on their side.
Yeah.
So that's cool. As a cleric, you're not necessarily going to feel flimsy or or paper thin like a wizard or a sorcerer or a warlock might, depending on your subclass. You should be able to get up in the dirty business of combat.
Yeah,
you should be able to.
It sort of depends. About half the subclasses are more melee aligned, with things like heavy armor and I believe, and I know we'll get into it, but I believe every cleric subclass gets either improved cantrips or improved, like, when you hit somebody with a weapon, it does something. Which is something that I think a lot of people don't expect.
No.
Right? That you can play a heavy armored, so it almost makes me think like the judges from Final Fantasy 12, that kind of thing.
That's such a good. That's a
Don't
good.
Fuck with me. I have the
line.
power of the gods and imagination on my side.
Yes.
There's so many different cleric subclasses. It's almost comical.
Yep.
And you can basically pray to any god you want. So there's no reason to be a dude who loves death that gets his powers from the god of life.
Yeah, it's like,
because you could just get your powers from the god of death.
I know,
or get your powers of the god of the forge, or like literally like any aspect of your world. Most of these, 5e kind of assumes that you're in like a polytheistic world with a god that sort of has his domain or has their domain over every aspect of reality. And so like you can be any cleric you want to be, bro.
That's right, baby.
I
love it.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's jump into, there's one more paragraph that I want to read.
Sure.
This is the further section. It's titled Divine Agents. So the second paragraph, the rest of it's kind of whatever. But this I want to read because this sort of supports what we've been saying. When a cleric takes up an adventuring life, it is usually because his or her god demands it. Pursuing the goals of the gods often involves braving dangers beyond the walls of civilization, smiting evil, or seeking holy relics in ancient tombs. Many clerics are also expected to protect their deities' worshippers, which can mean fighting rampaging orcs, negotiating peace between warring nations, or sealing a portal that would allow a demon prince to enter the world. So, like, again, just to further solidify this, if it makes no sense to play a cleric that either actively or passively you know,
subverting
their deity's situation. Like, it's just, there are many other ways you could be playing that. There are many other classes that work well with that story. I highly suggest, if you're thinking about playing a cleric, just play a cleric, man. Just fucking do it.
When you're thinking about, when you're designing a character that's sort of story first and not mechanics first, one might think, well, okay, so there's clerics, there's paladins, there's a divine soul sorcerer, there's the celestial warlock. There's a lot of different ways to play a dude that casts healing spells. Right. So you want to be thinking about what story, what fantasy you want to have, and basically the key differentiator for cleric is that they are doing the will of their god. So you can't play a cleric that is not doing the will of their god, because then if your goal is your own and not your deity's, then that makes much more sense for a paladin or a warlock. Obviously divine soul sorcerer is kind of a specific thing. But yeah, that to me, that's the key difference between say paladin and cleric, and also why we talked about, when we were talking about paladins weeks ago, why they're a charisma caster and not a wisdom caster, because their goal is their own. It sort of clues you in that their goal is their own, and the relationship with the deity is contractual. And with the cleric, you're a wisdom caster, your relationship with your deity is servitude.
The deity looks at the paladin and says, you're cool, I like what you're doing.
I will help.
Here's some power. The deity looks at the cleric and goes, you do my shit. Here's some power. Go do my shit. That's the the biggest difference is, as you said, the paladin's will is their own. And the cleric's will is the will of their god.
And it might be interesting if you really wanted to play that sort of like uneasy relationship with your god and you're a cleric. You could play sort of a person who is called to action by a god that they did not previously worship.
That is fine, right? I think that's cool.
And there are ways to do it. And not that you would be like fighting them every step of the way, but you'd sort of be like,
you're learning more about
like
things.
I don't know anything about any of this, but I've been called to action by this god, and probably you're going to learn why during the course of your campaign. Maybe it's your father that you never knew was a servant, or maybe you just had something, it could be anything.
It's a really cool way to explain leveling up. Because like, we always gloss over like leveling up and like learning these new things, right? And I'm sure there are people out there that play these like, gritty campaigns, and then when you level up, there's always downtime after you level up or whatever. And that's why I've incorporated downtime in our game a lot more often now, to where it usually does come after you level up, but that's only because usually at the end of every arc you're going to level up anyways, or whatever. So
it's sort of a feature of the milestone leveling.
And so, but a lot of people don't do that. And so when you level up, it's purely mechanical in a lot of people's games. And then that it just doesn't make sense that like, I woke up one day and now I can cast wish, or like whatever, I can not whatever, you know what I mean? So it's like, damn, like, so these kinds of things will always aid and make your experience that much more interesting when you're playing the game, if you lean into these types of things.
If you have these breakthroughs in connection with your god, or it's simply that you've done a good job and they've rewarded you for your service, and they're like, give you a little extra.
I love it.
A little extra allowance.
Third spell slot. Fuck yeah. All right, well, let's get into the class features. As always, we're just going to go through some of the mechanics of this and just sort of like pair that with the ideas of like, what's does this make sense? Like, what's the saving throw for this? Whatever, blah, blah. Usually these all make sense.
Extra throws in the idea that you have maybe a paladin and a cleric in the same party, and they both tell their god to eat shit, and the paladin's just fine, and the cleric's like, no, please. I've lost my paladin.
That's so funny. And the god's just sitting there like, it was cool when he did it. I don't like it that you said that. For sure. All right, so the cleric. Their class features are such: hit points, hit dice. You get 1d8.
Yes, they're not as squishy as the sorcerer or the wizard.
That's perfect the middle ground, in my opinion. Their proficiencies: you get light armor, medium armor, and shields. So even with medium armor and shields, at level 1, generally, you're depending on your dex, I believe. With medium armor, I think your max. Not max, we'll say your average AC is probably going to be 15 or 16. something like that.
Yeah,
Maybe
with a shield, it could be even higher.
it could be even higher with a shield, depending on what
armor you get.
subclass you pick. Because War Cleric, you can get heavy armor.
Sure.
Forge Cleric, you get heavy armor as well. So you could bump it all the way up to 20, hypothetically.
With medium armor and a shield, you can get a reasonable AC.
Yeah, you get a reasonable AC.
Yeah.
Which is solid. Which, again, that is good to encourage you to not be too afraid to get into the thick of things if you need to.
Yep.
Especially because a lot of the better healing spells are touch based and not range based.
Yep.
So keep that in mind. So saving throws. Go ahead and give. I always let Matt guess unless you can read it from here.
Sure. No. Saving throws. So wisdom, of course, is going to be the strong save. So for the weak save, it's strength, intelligence, or charisma. Religion is an intelligence check. I'm still gonna say it's charisma.
It is charisma. You're correct.
I think that's
I've always
leaning
thought
in.
Religion was odd as an intelligence check. I feel like you should be able to use religion as either an intelligence or a wisdom check. I feel like there are a lot of skills that should contain an either or clause to them. And as a dungeon master, you can just incorporate that any way you want. Of course, you can modify those things, but I think rules is written. I would love to see this in the D&D 1. A sort of revision of skills in that some of them exist in the center of a Venn diagram. I mean, especially if there's rules written in for intimidation checks that you could use strength or charisma.
Is that raw?
I believe that's an optional. That is a raw optional thing you can do. That is written into the player's handbook as an optional rule.
I think it might be true. I could be wrong. I think it might be true that raw, the DM is always allowed to substitute other skills,
which is fine.
But yeah, I hear you. I think to me, like I actually can justify it flavor-wise a lot easier than I can justify it as a game mechanic.
Sure.
Because like intelligence is the attribute, the ability score that lets you recall information.
Yes.
So if you're just like, I'm trying to remember that thing I read in my Bible or in my holy text.
Yes.
Right. That's clearly an intelligence check. The problem is that when you have a wizard or an artificer in your group, they always are better at religion than the cleric.
Than your cleric. Yeah.
They're always better at nature than the druid, and it just feels weird. At least with cleric, you could kind of justify a wisdom check by saying like, your god is speaking to you in your mind and reminding you the information, like for like druid, like remembering like what that mushroom is, it's a little bit harder.
But also I think that you could rule it so if you wrote in for the cleric as a base feature that you make religion checks or any check related to religion or your gods, whatever, using your wisdom modifier, you could just rule that as instead of your god is reminding you, you're just so intuitively, you have such an intuitive understanding of what your god wants.
Sure.
That instead of recalling information, you can kind of just go, well, I know what they like.
Yeah.
Do this, you know what I mean? And then
but even
if
that,
you roll low enough, then you got it wrong, or
even
you
that,
roll
though,
high enough and it makes sense.
Is kind of an intelligence check because you're sort of like making a logical deduction.
Kind of, but also
Here's what I would do.
But logic though kind of flies out the window with religion in some aspects. So it's kind of like unless technically
controversy,
whatever.
No.
But in game though, technically we accept these things as facts, right? Like generally there is not agnosticism or atheism usually in these games because it's like, well, I have a cleric and a paladin.
But I just mean if you're saying like, oh my god likes these certain things, so like ipso facto they probably want me to do this. That's basically an investigation, right? Yeah. How I would handle it. This is how I would handle it. Is let's say you're a life cleric.
Yes.
Right. And you're like, in game it's pertinent, and I ask you as the DM, I say, what do I think my god would want me to do in this situation because it seems related to like his particular deal. I might suggest that you just don't even make me roll, that you're just like, yo, you know your shit about like this. Versus if it's like, I'm trying to recall this fact about the god of the forge. In that case, just a straight intelligence-based religion check, because it's not something that is a part of your core. It's almost like a sub proficiency. You are sort of sub proficient in your domain, and you just know that shit like the back of your hand, and everything else is like, hey, do you remember or do you not? I don't know.
Extra suggests in chat that what if you made clerics have advantage on religion checks, just raw or base, and druids have advantage on nature checks, as an example of another situation. And while I like that idea, I've actually found that after DMing for so many years that having advantage and disadvantage is actually an extremely powerful mechanic. And I would rather see a numerical modification rather than giving them advantage or disadvantage on them, because that hypothetically it wouldn't. I mean, especially with the new D&D 1 rules, that gives you a 1 in 10 chance to always be right. Even if you're a cleric, which this would never happen, but it could be actually, because technically intelligence could just be a dump stat for you as a cleric.
Sure.
But if you have automatic advantage on religion and you're just a dumbass cleric and you got 6 intelligence, 1 in 10 chances you're always going to be right about this. And it's kind of like, well, that's a little weird if we're keeping it with that. You know what I mean? It might be clunky. It might be whatever. I would like to see a sort of like a redesign of the skills and be like, all right, here are all of the charisma skills that are only charisma skills and really can only be charisma. Then, like, you would have to layer them in such a way that like charisma and strength are like next to each other, right? Because those are going to be kind of like the overlapping ones in some aspects. And then like the next thing you would group together, like, I don't know, dexterity could be next. Dexterity and strength could be kind of grouped together. You could use and or there. And then like constitution and dexterity could be like and or there for some things, probably. I don't know. And then, charisma and constitution, probably not at all. Constitution might be like the only like separate thing.
Well, and then, today there are no constitution.
Right, and there aren't, right? Well, that's perfect then. And then charisma and intelligence, or charisma, intelligence, and wisdom can be the 3, and then strength, what did I say? No, wisdom, intelligence could be 1, charisma, strength, and dexterity could be like a triad, and then, I don't know. That's dumb, but like whatever, you know what I mean? Like I don't know. I like the and or kind of situations. Whatever. I think we can move on from that, but
I think there's a couple things that you could do. Is one, this is a place where DMs can simply not allow, and you've done this at times, simply not allow checks without proficiency.
That is a big baseline that I do as a DM. It's like, well, a lot of people will go, well, have I heard of this, or like whatever, and there's not enough of a reason for me to say yes to that.
Yeah.
I will immediately because I like to give reasons as a DM other than like because I said no. I go, well, do you have proficiency? And they go, actually, yeah, I have proficiency in history. And it's like, all right, well, let's see if you could. I will adjust the DC based on how unlikely it is, knowing your backstory, whether you've run into this or not.
Yeah, like just not allowing checks without proficiency in certain situations means that even though the wizard has, +5 in religion, if the cleric is trying to remember a sort of an obscure fact about a god, even though their check may be lower, they're the only ones that get to make the check.
Yes.
And that makes the cleric feel good, because the wizard isn't outclassing them on all these religion checks. If it's a very sort of like general thing that a lot of people might know, then of course the wizard gets to check, because it's just, do they remember that fact that maybe anybody would have learned in school. But if it's like, what is the god of death's favorite tea, it's like there's no way the wizard would know. Right. Where the cleric might have had a chance of reading a very specific text, whatever. So I like that. And in terms of like modifying the rules, I think frankly a lot of people don't understand what the ability scores are actually meant to represent.
Yes.
And what I would like to see in 1D&D is very clear descriptions, and actually the ones in the current book aren't bad. The thing is, people don't read them. I would like more emphasis placed on what the ability scores are actually meant to represent, and then just explicitly reminding DMs that they are allowed to swap ability scores on skill checks where appropriate.
Yeah.
That puts the onus on DMs to know what they're doing, but that's the game we're playing, right? If the DM is kind of like doing wild shit, then they're doing wild shit. As an example, like I always talk about how I think perception and investigation get kind of lumped together in weird ways.
Yes.
I think intelligence is underused in general in 5e, which is why in a way, I hate to see intelligence be nerfed by letting those checks be other things. But I do think there are instances where it's like, hey, man, this is about my specific cleric domain. This is about something like, my god has sent me on this task, and to get to the next, to unlock this puzzle, I need to remember this fact about religion. Like, I think there's a reasonable chance that he might be, or they might be, you know, whatever, that I might be able to intuit the answer. And I think that flexibility is totally cool if your DM wants to, you know, leverage it.
Yeah. Hell yeah. Well then, so like I said, because they are so heavily subclass dependent, there are really only 3 features of the base cleric to talk about. That's not going to necessarily be all we talk about when we talk about the cleric. We'll really dive a lot more into this stuff when we jump into the subclasses. We'll at the end of when we talk about this, we're going to sort of run down the subclasses, and I kind of just want to get your immediate, like, you know what I mean? Like, because you can make a god of anything, I guess, but like when you read it off the rip the first time, you're just kind of like,
yeah.
All right,
you
weird.
Rapid fire, and I'll tell you what I think.
But first and foremost, starting at level 1, you get your divine domain, right? So this is your core thing. This is your subclass. This is the thing that drives the actual class itself. Now, it makes total sense to me that in order to derive your powers, you have to have a god that gives you things, the powers. And so you cannot be a cleric without having the god.
Correct.
So, therefore, at level 1, to be a cleric, you have to have your divine domain, which in turn means you have your god.
You have your god. Yes. And an interesting thing that I think maybe a lot of people don't think about is you get your weapon and armor proficiencies and shield proficiencies from the cleric class. Which to me means that you, just because you know how to use that mace doesn't mean you like learned how to use that mace. Like this is just like your god imbuing you with power. Which I think is an aspect of it that never gets played, but I think is interesting.
Yeah, it's really cool. It's a really cool part of it. And that's kind of something that I wish that they would and they might be doing this. I haven't entirely read through the updated background stuff and like how much more that's intertwined with your character. I would like to see that kind of stuff sort of done away with when it comes to class.
Okay.
And your, like, with the exception of, like, you know, the martial classes, like fighter, obviously, I think you take fighter at level 1, you get extra proficiencies with weapons and armor. Same thing with, like, you know, the other martials. But I would like to see that tied more into backgrounds, because if you're getting these, it's very cool. But it's also kind of like odd, like one day you're like, when you wake up and your god's just like, fucking,
I think it's
maces, bitch, and you're like, yeah, you know.
I think it's rad. It reminds me of
kind of tight.
It reminds me of Shazam.
Yeah, it's like
you know what I mean? Like you're just a
like,
dude, and then all of a sudden you're like,
and now you're more. You're god. Yeah. But I kind of would like, just for streamline's sake, I would like to see you pick your base background. That gives you your base proficiencies when it comes to whatever.
They're doing
then
all the
your martial stuff goes beyond that.
They're doing all the skills and skills, ability scores, languages, all that shit is through background.
Okay, cool.
Things like weapon and armor proficiencies are going to remain class, and that's just game
fine.
mechanics.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean,
Otherwise,
I don't
it'd
have
just
a
be
problem
too
with
weird.
it. Sure.
You'd end up having people that are like, well, I'm just always going to pick the knight background because then I can be a sorcerer with heavy armor or whatever. Right?
Well, you can't, because you can't wear heavy armor as and cast spells in certain.
You can if you're proficient.
No, I have to double check that. I believe I believe it's not a proficiency thing. I believe it's the subclass that warrants that. I can't remember though.
No, because like that's why a lot of people nowadays are taking one level of artificer before they go wizard.
Got
because
it.
now
Very
they can just be a heavy armor wizard.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Well then, I stand corrected. The divine domain, that makes total sense. It, like, there's not a problem there. I like that it's level 1. We've talked about this. We wish that paladin oaths were level 1, because it doesn't really make any sense that you're a paladin and then you swear an oath at level 3.
Yeah.
So this is already great. We're already starting off great.
Yep.
The very next thing that you get is at level 2, which is channel divinity. This is another feature that you share with the paladin. This is a holy warrior's or holy person's sort of intrinsic, very powerful thing that they can do. As the paladin, you get your specific channel divinity at level 3, because that comes with your subclass.
Yes.
And then that's specific to your subclass. As a cleric, your channel divinity, you get at level 2, you get turn undead, which is specific to a cleric, and then you get one other thing from your subclass, depending on your subclass.
I would really like to see that baseline turn undead go away. I know it's such a historical thing, but it just strikes me as strange that the god of the forge gives a fuck
About an undead creature,
right?
Yeah.
Or the god of like obviously if you're playing the prototypical priest, this is great.
Yeah.
I would like to see this maybe lumped into the life cleric or certain clerics, or
Well,
I
so
don't
that's
know.
why, with the exception of trickery, I would argue that there's an aspect of the original domains for the base handbook: knowledge, life, light, nature, tempest, and war. There's
Those all in the base one.
the knowledge, life, light, nature, tempest, trickery, and war. They're all 7 of those are base.
Player's handbook.
Yep.
Holy fuck, dude.
Yeah, there's 7 subclasses base.
Insane.
For,
Most classes got like 2.
Yeah, with
maybe
the exception
3.
of wizard. Yeah, cleric and wizard are like the 2 where
That's
it's
true.
like they
Yeah,
have
wizard
like,
got like 8,
because they
right?
have to go with the spell school.
Yeah,
So
that's fair.
but yeah, I would argue with the exception of trickery, you could make an argument for all of
Sort of
those things
works,
that it's taboo for, and so, but with, I mean, you can't base it off of that, because now with the expansion of all these fucking subclasses that we have, it's like half
so
of these
many,
fucking subclasses have nothing to do with life or death.
I think something interesting that they could do with this, and I'm so interested for anyone that hasn't checked out any of the 1D&D playtest material. If you're into the stuff that we're talking about, I definitely recommend
Please do.
taking a look.
Yeah.
They haven't talked about classes yet. It's been basically like character generation, races, backgrounds.
Yeah.
But I'm so interested to see what they do with the classes. But one thing that I think I talked about with you, maybe on the Paladin pod, was I'd love to see turn undead, instead of turn undead, be like, I don't know what you'd call it, but like turn blank. And then depending on what your domain
fill in the blank
is,
with your domain.
you fill in the blank, right? So if you, if you're like the order domain cleric, you could, fucking
chaos.
fucking turn chaos.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And there's like, if there's a being from limbo,
X amount,
or whatever, or if there's just whatever, I just think that would be rad, and that's
Yeah.
something I would consider doing as a DM. If if you're the I don't know, the god of nature or whatever, and some fucking duodron from Mechanist shows up, but dude, I'm letting you turn the duodron.
Yeah, for sure.
You know?
Turn the duodron.
Yeah.
That's tight. That's tight. I love that. At level 5, this feature gets upgraded in that you can choose to, instead of turn undead. Actually, it's not a choice. This is just what happens. At level 5, and then subsequent levels higher, the CR expands. But turn undead is transformed or upgraded into destroy undead. And this is all very cool, and it's great. I love the mechanic. I'll explain it in a second, but it still falls under that same thing where it's like, well, I would like to see, let's operate further under the assumption that it could be really cool if this was destroy or turn blank, insert blank, based on your subclass, right? So this idea is really cool. It's just antiquated in that, because there's so many options now, it's like, well, what's the point of this?
This made sense at the
specifically?
time.
Yeah, it made total sense at the time.
And there's probably an argument to be made that maybe all of the gods find
If that's true in your campaign.
Yeah, if that's true in your campaign, you could maybe say that all of the gods find undeath specifically particularly distasteful.
Yeah.
Although I just don't think that makes sense.
It's odd for that to be the case. It's fine in what's the word I'm looking for?
Like there's always going to be a god that's like necromancer boy.
Yeah, of course.
Is there not?
There isn't mine.
Right. I just think that's so, like, if your god is in our campaign Jud,
Yeah.
like it doesn't make any sense for you to have turn undead.
No,
if you're a cleric of Jud.
Yeah, of course, it makes no sense.
So and again, all ills are solved.
Turn life.
Yeah.
Fucking destroy
exactly.
life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All ills can be remedied by talking to your DM.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Anyways, this it starts off at the 5th level. The CR of the undead that you automatically. So by the way, the mechanic is starting at 5th level. When an undead fails its saving throw against your turn undead feature, the creature is instantly destroyed if its challenge rating is at or below a certain threshold.
Okay.
So you just automatically once a day, in a radius or whatever, just fucking kill. Destroy without anything, just swaths of undead.
That's incredibly powerful.
And if you've watched Legend of Vox Machina on Amazon, the moment when Pike sort of comes back and fights the Tide of Bone in the game, she Ashley Johnson shows up via Skype, and against the Tide of Bone, literally, there's hundreds of low-level skeletons and zombies and stuff in Whitestone.
Yeah.
And they're all like, fuck, like, what are we gonna do? And then Ashley's just like, I'd like to turn undead. And then Matt's like, oh shit. And then she's like, oh yeah, I'm level, whatever level they were, like 12 or something at the time, maybe 10. And then he's like, well shit, the CR at level 11, let's say they were level 11, is 2 or lower. All of these fucking, you know, enemies were like CR
half or
1/4 or
one,
1 or whatever. So she just fucking annihilated all of them. So it's dope as fuck.
Yeah.
The ability is very cool, and it gets all the way up to, the only problem is that it doesn't scale that well, because it's beyond level 8 or 11. It's very rare that, especially, I don't know, for me as a DM, if my party is 10 or higher, it's going to be very rare that they have a combat in which they are dealing with CR, what is 8? So for level 8 for the Cleric, for you to get your Destroy Undead feature, the CR has to be 1 or lower.
Okay.
It's going to be very rare that you come into combat specifically with CR1 creatures, because it's kind of like there's no reason for me to put this problem in front of you if you can just like crush them like ants. You know what I mean? So
but it is
odd,
cool though if
fun.
you have a cleric in your party, you know, and you want to have either a large undead creature or, you know, somebody that fucks with undeads, like give them a bunch of minions and give them the opportunity to have this awesome thing like you were just talking about in Whitestone. Extra says, wait, is this the only thing that CR actually applies to? Yeah, very little.
Very little.
Part of some of the reasons that Druid is so clunky is because it makes you like look through the monster manual and shit for things under a certain CR. There's not much, my man.
Yeah, it's tough.
And
it's this in Druid, yeah,
and like CR is pretty generally unreliable.
and then the summon mechanics for
Also,
spells, but that's it. Really.
So there are a few things, but not too many.
So the only other base feature for the Cleric is my favorite feature. It's also the most vague feature of any class in the game, and I love that about it because it's cool. It makes me, as a dungeon master, work a little harder, and it lets everybody become more creative at the table, including the rest of your party members that can be like, well, what should you do? It's like, well, ask for that. You know, it's very cool stuff. It's Wish at Home. It's Divine Intervention.
Wish at Home.
Yeah, Divine Intervention states, beginning at the 10th level, you can call on your deity to intervene on your behalf when your need is great. Imploring your deity's aid requires you to use your action. Describe the assistance you seek and roll percentile dice. If you're unfamiliar with percentile dice, it is a base D10 and then another D10, but all of the numbers are doubled. So, excuse me, not doubled. They're given a second decimal. So
it's effectively a D100.
Yeah, it's a D100.
But it's not. It's a little less unruly.
Yes.
Can you imagine rolling an act? Because I've rolled a D30, but you have a D100.
I have a D100. Yeah. I can't remember if it was Jenna or Garrett who gave it to me, but I have one. I just don't roll it because it's ridiculous. Yeah,
that's rad.
Yeah, it's tight.
I've rolled a D30 before, and even that's ridiculous.
Oh, it is. Yeah, absolutely. D100, literally this big.
Yeah.
Anyway, so you roll a D100. If you roll a number equal to or lower than your cleric level, you get this at level 10, by the way. Your deity intervenes. You succeed. The DM chooses the nature of the intervention. The effect of any cleric spell or cleric domain spell would be appropriate. So you can, it's very, like I said, this is Wish at Home.
Sort of like Wish.
The rules as written encourage you to just sort of give them access to a spell. If you don't want to be like, well, what the fuck do I do as a DM? You just look at the spell list and be like, fucking Revivify, or whatever, you know what I mean?
Sure. Well, this could let you cast like a 9th level True Resurrection or whatever.
Exactly.
At level 10.
Yes, hypothetically at level 10. So. If your deity intervenes, you can't use this feature again for 7 days.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you can use it again after you finish a long rest. So you can try this every single day.
I do hate features that make you track days.
Yeah. Well, this is so powerful.
I get it.
And it's free.
I totally get it. This is fine. I'm really okay with this.
Yeah.
Just speaking in general, it's so hard to track in-game days.
And for me, this would have to be 10 days for this to make any sense.
Right.
Yeah.
No,
it can be 7. Yeah. We're following the Judeo-Christian calendar, I understand. But the best, so this is great. I mean, like, there's not really much to talk about here. It's just, it is what you want as a player. Well, just to finish my thought, because every player that has ever played a paladin or a cleric or any class that is connected to a deity mechanically will always role play a prayer without mechanics attached to it, pleading with their god to do something. And as a dungeon master, you have to sit there and go, okay, mechanically, nothing's gonna happen. Yeah. And you have to think, like, how am I? And then you can make them roll a religion check or a charisma check or something. You know what I mean? Blah blah blah. Sure. Which in that moment, I would argue, you know, using your charisma or using your wisdom and accompanied to religion. But then you could be like, well, isn't it just persuasion? Whatever, doesn't matter. Right. Then you have to decide as a dungeon master, how are you going to reward this? You can't mechanically, I mean, in my opinion, you can't and shouldn't mechanically reward a simple prayer with anything really substantial. The comfort of a nice role play moment of, like, you know, your nature cleric praying to their god in the middle of a forest that is about to be overtaken by, like, a wildfire, of, you know, the forest maybe being burned around you, but you seeing this, like, single little bud of a new sapling or something. That's beautiful and great. Right. You can't, if the cleric is praying for you to, like, why, if you care this much, if this is your domain, do something. Like, you can't do the, like, you know, well, why, if God is real, why aren't they answering prayers? Yeah.
Even rule of cool should have limits.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Because otherwise, why have any mechanics at all?
Agreed. This is your quote unquote answer to that, where as a cleric, you could at level 10 pray with such conviction that actually, yes, a miracle does fucking happen. And when I say a miracle, it's not just prestidigitation, it's not just this, you know, sacred flame. It is a literal, you bring someone back to life that has been dead for 300 years.
Or you put out a you know, hundreds of, you put out a square mile of forest fire.
Yeah, that's fucking sick as hell.
And what's rad about it is not even just the moment, but thinking about what it would mean to witness a miracle in real life. Yeah. You know, granted, this is a world where people probably believe more fully in the gods than maybe people do in our world today. But like, imagine, you know, you're in the forest and you're on, like, an escort mission, right? Mm-hmm. You're taking the stable boy to his lover and whatever. On the other side of the wood, right? And the forest is consumed with fire, and it looks dire, and then you pray to your god, and the fire goes out. Yes. And from the ash, you know, blooms new flowers, and this person who's in your party with you is, like, completely moved. And I can imagine, like, 20 sessions later, the story of the miracle that happened in that wood that day. You hear this from townsfolk, and it's awesome. You know, miles away from where it happened. Those moments in a campaign that are kind of creating lore are so satisfying as a player. So good. When you do something as a player that affects the world in ways that isn't so immediate, is so satisfying. And I love this kind of feature. Yeah. And if it's not it might not be the most powerful, but it's definitely the coolest capstone, which is that it just happens.
You just do it.
It just
works. It's fucking awesome, dude.
So once every 7 days, you just say, hey, fucking do it, dude.
That's right. It's like, hey, man. Yeah. I'm the coolest. We are the tightest of anybody that's ever been. Yeah. Let's fucking do this shit. And your guy's just like, say less, my man. I'm here for you. Yeah. It's fucking sick. Yeah. It's awesome.
Definitely. It's easily the coolest capstone.
It's the coolest capstone for sure. I don't know what best or whatever means, but, like, to just be like, hey, the one thing that every player wants to do with this class, like, the one thing every single cleric player wants to do is pray, and then your prayers be answered. Yeah. At your capstone is that becomes simply reality for you. You are the person who, yes, you pray and it fucking happens. Yeah. That's fucking sick. That's awesome. So We've got 1 minute left. I do have to wrap this up pretty quickly. I do have subsequent things to do.
How dare you.
But we're gonna rapid fire subclass. Just at Matt. I'm just gonna. I'm gonna. This is so funny. There's so fucking many.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll
so
give you my immediate reaction.
Yes.
Okay.
All right. So number 1, Arcana domain.
Why?
Yep. I don't know. Death domain.
Dope.
Yep. Forge domain.
I fucking love this.
Fine. I love it. It's
rad.
Hephaestus, baby. That's Greek shit. Grave domain.
Yeah, there's so many of these. Death, grave,
Truncate that shit, baby.
Yeah,
all in one. Knowledge domain.
I don't know why there's knowledge and arcana. They're kind of
the same thing.
One of the both. But I do think knowledge domain is interesting.
Knowledge is the better of the two.
Yes,
in my opinion.
And I think it's cool.
Yes. Life domain.
Yeah, I mean this is the quintessential, right?
Light domain.
Light domain. Why?
Put that with life domain. I don't know. Just combine light with like a sort of a nice thing about some other thing.
Yeah,
it doesn't need to be light specifically.
Yeah.
Nature domain.
So I'll take an extra couple seconds on this one.
it.
Nature domain, I don't think it should exist.
Okay.
Because it's so much like a druid. It just sort of waters. I would say this: nature domain, light domain, life domain, and what's the other one I'm thinking of?
Tempest.
Tempest domain. Those 4 to me could all pray to the same god, probably.
I completely agree.
And so I think that at least 2 or 3 of those should just not exist.
Yeah, I think they should just focus on the life. I think life should be this sort of overarching
And
thing.
I do think Tempest is really rad. To me, I think if you really want that nature domain that's separate from just life, I think play Tempest.
Yeah.
Because Tempest is sort of like the elements, the weather, that tempestuous nature of kind of chaos. I just don't know why you need nature, life, and Tempest.
Yeah,
I would just get rid of nature domain.
Order domain.
I think this is fucking sick.
It's the illest in my opinion.
love it.
It's fucking tight as hell.
It's one of my favorite flavor-wise.
Yes.
Yeah.
Its cousin, peace domain.
Peace domain, I think it's a terrible fucking design because it doesn't do anything that you would expect it to do.
I know, right?
There's nothing about it that's pacifist.
Yep.
There's nothing, like, it's dope mechanically.
Yeah.
It's dope. It's really powerful. But I think if you're like, I think there's a lot of people that want options to play a pacifist character, even though it's like, why? And I think they see this and they're like, oh, that's my jam, and it does not do what you think it's going to do.
I agree. Tempest domain, we just sort of explained that. Trickery domain.
I think it's cool.
Yeah,
I think it's cool.
It's cute.
I don't really know what it does, to be honest, but I think it's cool.
Yeah.
It does that like invoke duplicity, right? Where it's
Yeah.
sort of like the thing. Yeah,
why not?
In general, I like the idea of praying to the god of sort of just
Fucking around.
Just fucking around.
Yeah.
Rad.
The god of fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Jester.
Based Jester.
Yeah.
Twilight domain.
Twilight. Again, super powerful. I don't know why this exists.
Yeah, I don't know. It just kind of felt like I don't know. Yeah, I totally
And
agree.
the things that it does, again, make no goddamn sense with the flavor. It's just like, you can heal because Twilight is chill. You're all these hit points. They can like skywalk.
I know.
It
And you're
reminds
like,
me of
what,
when you're using
what the hell?
I don't know if you ever did this, but when you're using the Game Genie on, do you remember Game Genie?
I remember Game
Yeah,
Genie.
with like Mario 3.
I had a Game Shark, but yes.
Okay, same deal. So you put in Super Mario 3 with the Game Genie, and there was a code for like, I forget what it's called, but it was like airwalking, and you could just jump in the sky.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's cool, but why does Twilight? Why does praying to the, first of all, why is there a god of Twilight?
Yeah, that's
and then you pray to the god of Twilight, and you can just walk on this. I don't get it. I just think it's terrible.
And then last but not least, War domain.
War. Yeah, I think it's very cool.
That's of course.
And God of War.
God of War, baby.
God of War.
Shouts out. I cannot wait to play. Dude, I cannot wait to play God of War Ragnarok. I'm buying a PS5 specifically to play that game.
Starring Taika Waititi.
Is he in that?
Oh,
right. Oh, I get it. That was funny.
Yeah, thanks.
Man, fuck Taika Waititi. I'll see you guys later. Get us the fuck out of here, man. I know he watches this show. Bye, everybody. I hope you enjoyed. Cleric is A tier. Cleric is A tier.
A tier.
A tier. A tier. Hell yeah.